being consistently on, Threads and whatever other networks that I want to be on has been probably the biggest thing for me. Creates this really virtuous cycle where you have folks wanting to talk with you on the platform. You get ideas from engaging with those folks you're talking to, which then inspires new posts. But as long as you're there on a consistent basis, like that to me has become sort of like the rallying cry of, how you can form and grow an audience online, really regardless of the platform you're talking about.
It is Buffer Chat time. A very warm, buffery welcome to you. I am so excited that we are going to hang out today. And if we have not hung out before, my name is Kirsti Lang. I'm a senior writer at Buffer. And today we are talking about how one creator accidentally built a community and rekindled his passion for making music on Threads. So joining me in the virtual studio is Brandon Green, who is not only an incredibly talented creator and musician, but is also an incredibly talented product manager who I am lucky enough to work with at Buffer. Brandon, thank you so much for making the time.
Hi, thank you. It's a pleasure.
I feel like I'm in your studio right now. It's pretty cool.
You literally are if you were in the room with me, because it's just my basement and it's kind of a mess. But this is where I work usually. This is also where I make music. So you are literally in my studio technically.
I love that. I always talk about my virtual studio, but your studio is much cooler than my virtual one. Okay, context before I get carried away. So as I mentioned, Brandon is a product manager at Buffer, an independent musician, a writer, a DIYer, and a dad. So he is one of the busiest people I know. He started his tech career after music school and starting in the music industry, gradually making his way through various areas of tech, such as e-commerce, food delivery, and SaaS, while making music in his spare time. But since 2023, he's released music as Kid Lightbulbs, building a small but passionate following around the internet in parallel with his work as a product manager. So, Kid Lightbulbs, I'm going to call you that for the rest of the interview. No, I'm just joking.
Please don't.
That would be creepy.
Yeah.
But although some people are probably going to be like, oh my gosh, I know Brandon as Kid Lightbulbs because you are internet famous. Okay, so we have some very talented creators on the Buffer team, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from more of them soon. But what makes Brandon unique is his focus on Threads. He was a Threads early adopter and has now gone from inconsistent creator to being quite prolific on the platform. And he's even started to branch out on other, shall we say, more intensive platforms like TikTok. That feels like a fair assessment?
Yeah, I'm still struggling with TikTok, but that's my problem.
TikTok, we love you, but also I'm scared to say anything about TikTok because every time I have to edit these podcasts, I'm like, oh wait, that's TikTok. Is it available in the US? Is it not available? It's very difficult to keep up
right now
with.
It is. So yeah, you're good.
Yeah. Okay. At the time of recording, but you never know. May have to edit this part out again. Damn it. Let's start at the beginning. So just for folks who want to learn more about your journey. So when you first got your start on Threads, did you intentionally set out to start building your personal brand as a musician on there, or did that happen organically?
Yeah, I think mostly organically. And for a little bit of background, I've been sort of like on social platforms to some degree for like years, since like 2007, 2008, whenever they started like really becoming a thing. I think I had a fairly early Twitter account. I was on Facebook and Instagram as soon as they were available, but I was always really a consumer, not really like a creator or ever sort of intending to build an audience. Something I always kind of wanted to do in some form or another as a musician, but I was always very busy with my work life, or just kind of suffered from some version of imposter syndrome. And I had tried, stints at like building a following more intentionally. I think most recently beyond Threads, I like tried to do that on LinkedIn as like a product management creator. And honestly, I just found myself like really frustrated by that experience, mostly just because a lot of the discourse on LinkedIn is just not really kind of aligned with the things that I like to talk about online. But when Threads launched in, July 2023, I think, I had already started working for Buffer. So I was sort of like looking at it as an opportunity to just kind of do some greenfield research on a new social platform, kind of see what the deal was. And I also had been coincidentally working on this album of music around the same time. I was sort of wrapping it up and trying to figure out, when to release it, how to promote it. And I was like, let's just try talking about music on here, while knowing that I was doing it also implicitly as some like research for work. And after, a few months of just like interacting with folks there and, posting honestly like pretty random takes about things vaguely music and tech related, I kind of just like started, like my audience started blowing up. Not hugely. I didn't have anything go massively viral or anything. But I just saw like steady growth of like not just a follower count, but engagement on my posts, and really most importantly sort of conversations that I started having with fellow musicians and music fans about like really interesting topics that were kind of quite aligned with what I wanted to be talking with people about online. I like an early example was that of that was I actually kind of publicly debated whether I should take on the artist name Kid Lightbulbs. I had this album that I was just going to release under my own name, and I was just like, this doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like appropriate to put out an album as Brandon Lucas Green, which is my full name, that I have to use because there are actually other musicians in music named Brandon
Oh my
Green,
gosh,
which is a
of
fun
course.
fact. So I was kind of like debating taking on this alias, and I, posted about it publicly, kind of like took feedback from, other musicians in the community, not just on whether I should do it, but like how to go about it, because, the services on which, listeners listen to music, they have their own rules about, changing your name. So it was actually really helpful to have a public platform to talk about this stuff. And by doing so, I actually like kind of built an audience out of nowhere. And it led to a small but fairly passionate following of people who really like my music, much of which I had been sitting on for years and never really doing anything with, again because of stress, imposter syndrome, feeling too busy to do anything with that music.
Yeah.
And that combined with my time at Buffer and sort of my role at Buffer, where we're a very transparent company, we're trying to be immersed in our both actual user base and our potential user base of really anybody who wants to create and publish things online. It sort of allowed me to create this like weird sort of hybrid, person of multitudes, where I am a creator, an artist, and someone who works in tech with a very, specific set of views and values about tech that align with my work at Buffer. And it sort of allowed me to like really kind of like carve out this niche on that platform where discussion and thoughtful discourse is really kind of at least at the start when I was building my audience, like really key to growth there.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And you've kind of touched on this already, but I would love to. I often use the expression, I want to pull on this thread in podcast recordings, but that's going to get really confusing here. So let's dig a little deeper into why you think Threads has been the one to stick for you. It
Yeah.
really feels like I mean, and I can see it in the way that you interact and engage online. It feels like your home space. When did that
Yeah.
start to happen?
I think probably like, in that, first 6 months or so of the journey, and realizing that I could actually have real discussions with fellow musicians or people in tech, other creators who are kind of like vaguely affiliated with the interests that I have, and form an actual community around it. Like the community aspect of Threads is what thrived really early for me and very quickly, and has, even though Threads has really grown massively in terms of its active user base, like what I see as like the majority of content posted on Threads, there is still that semblance of community that is always there and, never really went away. It's changed, and there's different like splinter communities that I see forming on Threads.
Mm.
But, having a community there, one, it's like such a real and powerful dopamine hit that like really boosts your confidence or your willingness to stay there, because you have people that like become maybe not friends, but just regulars that you're regularly
Yeah.
touching base with. They have context on you have context on them, and you're able to like kind of not just grow your audience, but develop your craft, the way you talk about your craft, etc., online. and that really helped me keep going and like make it stick. I distinctly remember also kind of after I took on the Kid Lightbulb's name, I started releasing music. I started putting out some singles, um, uh, just to kind of keep releasing music. And there were a few specific singles that I had released. You can listen to them on Spotify, whatever streaming service you use,
We will
and
include all these links. I just want to add that in because people need to listen to Trendsetters. It is my favorite Kid Lightbulb song.
thank you. That was actually the first single I put out after taking on the name, which was really interesting
That's
that it
cool.
has that staying power for you. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that. But anyway, I put out that single and I put another single out called Ritual. And those two singles in particular, like, really resonated with, not a huge audience, but like with a small group of people that I respected quite a bit. I really appreciated
Yeah.
their sound. We had some like good discussion about those songs on Threads, and like that really kind of doubled down on that community nature. It's not just a public town square, as a lot of people like to call Threads or X or whatever, but it also allows you to carve out, or allowed me to carve out, these little sort of like splinter back rooms where to me it often feels like you're playing a gig and you're hanging out backstage with all the other bands playing on the bill with you, just to like really double down on the music part of this. But that's
I love that.
often what good discussion that I have on Threads feels like, and that's really what made it stick for me as a creator. And I've tried that on other platforms. I never felt that on Instagram, and I think that's part of what historically psyched me out of promoting music
Yes.
online. I kind of don't really understand TikTok. Just it's not really my cup of tea in terms of
Nobody
content
does.
and
No, I'm just
entertainment.
kidding. People do.
Um, yeah, and some of the newer platforms that are still kind of more kind of discourse based. X is not really my cup of tea in a bunch of different ways. Blue Sky is, but I've really kind of struggled to cultivate that discourse there early on.
Mm.
Although I see like little glimmers of it, but Threads, it's like always been there from the start, and it's never really gone away. And I have like friends and regulars there that keep me coming back.
That feels really special. And I love how you're talking, when you kind of talk about like how things have worked out for you on Threads, you're not using words like engagement or engagement rate. You're talking about real discussions, which feels, I mean, it feels quite unique. It's not something that really
Yeah.
does happen on Instagram, TikTok, or maybe even LinkedIn, where it kind of is, even if you do get a discussion, it's a yes and kind of discussion. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I really like the way that you frame that and the importance of just kind of that give and take as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's well said. And I think like as a as really I think any sort of creator or artist where you're making art, output, whatever, that is not necessarily the content you are posting. Like I have
Mm,
I post and engage on these platforms to ultimately drive people to check out my work at Buffer, or to
yeah,
drive to check out my music and listen to it and potentially buy an album of mine, a t-shirt, a Kid Lightbulb's t-shirt or whatever. Like
I gotta
the
get one of
the
those.
follower count, the engagement rate is all just kind of like leading indicators to those things. And
Yes.
especially where like you don't have control over what Meta decides to do with the algorithm, and like that manifests very clearly in the fact that like I know for myself, and I know many other musicians on Threads, like our follower sort of growth has sort of, it's like stagnated. Like I've been kind of sitting around 2,100 followers for months
Mm,
after months and months of steady growth, and I don't really know why. I can't really get any clear answers as to why, but like I've kind of learned to just like accept that, and just continue to do the things that feel right to me, because I know that community is there, and it slowly and very organically and intangibly grows. And I get a couple more people to check out my music on a streaming service. I
yeah.
occasionally get someone to buy a t-shirt and whatever, and that's what feels like the meaningful success to me.
Okay, so I just want to get really granular on the impact of your regular presence on Threads and what that has done for you, not just kind of vanity metrics on Threads, but for your music. Can you talk
Yeah.
a little bit about that?
Yeah. I'm gonna sort of disclaimer this with like none of these numbers are really huge, especially if you think about like musicians at the level of like who you see in popular music. Like these are this is chunk change compared to something like Taylor Swift or Billie
Oh,
Eilish or something like that.
yeah.
But it's super impressive to me. And the reason for that is that like I went to school for music, but Kid Light Bulbs is a side hobby for me. I have very little time that I can put into it. And I effectively started from nothing. Threads is interesting because of the like that whole mechanic when they launched it where you can sort of import your following from Instagram to have sort of a built-in following on day one. I like didn't have an Instagram following. I didn't use it to promote music. I had maybe like 250 followers and most of them were like friends and former coworkers of mine. So like I didn't really have an audience when I started. So to go from effectively nothing to today where I have, you know, roughly 250 recurring monthly listeners, I think, on Spotify. I've sold like over $1,500 in music on Bandcamp, which is like the primary storefront that I have for like the albums and things that I put out. I started an email newsletter, and newsletters are something that I've like started and gave up on multiple times in my like professional life. And I like landed on something that sort of like, again, merges a lot of these different topics that I have in mind together with my, like with Kid Light Bulbs and the music that I put out. And I have something like 105 subscribers on there, 6 of which are actually paying patrons of mine.
That's
Disclaimer, 2 of those
amazing.
are family members who just want to support me and know when I drop stuff. But like, again, that all coming from effectively nothing, roughly 18, 20 months ago, is huge for me.
That is incredible. As a
And
one
it's
man
unlocked,
band, literally.
yeah, and it's unlocked all these like other weird like fringe benefits, like the fact that I've done like all these collaborations with musicians that I've
Mm.
connected with very specifically on Threads. We put out 2 full-length collaborative albums where I posted online as a joke that someone should cover a song of mine, and it was like it was like a wordplay on the song title. The song was called "Head on My Heart," and I made a joke that that someone should cover it and we should release it as Threads on My Art because I posted it on Threads. It was a really stupid wordplay joke, and it like caught on, and something like 13 musicians were like, "I'll cover a song of yours," and like put it out. And then
That's
we made a whole
huge.
covers album on that idea, and now it's something that we've raised like a few $100 for some charities just by sales of that album. And that's something that never would have happened if I
I
didn't
love
start
that.
building a community on Threads. There's a few other examples of that exact same thing that, you know, over the last, again, like 20 months have happened. And again, like that's to me the real impact. It's not really the follower count that matters to me. It's this other stuff that again came from basically nothing in mid 2023.
So, what I think is really cool, and you kind of talk about how, you know, oh, it's not a very big following or it's not a huge amount of people or whatever the case is, but even with, I think yeah, 2,100 followers. That for me, 2,100 super engaged, passionate followers who appreciate you and your work and want to engage with it feels a lot more valuable to me than, you know, 20,000 followers who couldn't care less and are probably not even
Mm-hmm.
seeing you pop up in their feed.
Yeah.
So yeah, and yeah, just so much more likely to, as you say, listen to your music, buy a t-shirt, recommend your music, click out of
Yeah.
the platform because that there was a lot of friction involved in that at the moment and becoming even more so. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think the value, and maybe this is just a sign of a bigger shift in social, but the value feels less like what matters is follower count. It's more about what matters is engaged followers.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm thinking
Yeah.
out loud.
No, I think it's actually quite well put and does, you know, eventually segue into something like what are the sort of successes that came with building such a following. But
Yeah.
I mean, you're super right. And even that 2,100 followers, I wouldn't say that like it's 100% of that audience is highly engaged, you know,
Sure.
regularly listening. But even like 100 or 200 of those folks, you know, are kind of regularly rotating through my stuff and, you know, even just liking it or replying to it just to like acknowledge that I continue to exist in their minds as a musician or as like
Yeah.
a personality that contains the multitudes that I have. And I do see where that directly translates to, you know, anytime I'm, you know, opening up a conversation about something musical, I'll get, you know, those those discussions to happen. And then, a few days later, I'll announce that, a new song is out, or I just posted a new album to my Bandcamp page, which is really like the main way where I invite people to financially support Kid Light Bulbs.
Mm.
That leads to a very clear and distinct spike of listeners and plays and purchases. And those people who are really invested in me as an artist, like, are very generous, where, the to get into a little bit of like the music, independent music culture thing for a second.
Yeah.
It's very hard to get people to compensate an artist for their music directly. You can do so by buying, like a vinyl record or a CD at a show, but most people just listen to music on a streaming service, and 80+% of musicians who have their music listened to on a streaming service never get paid for it at all. And if you do, it's like cents. So to have someone go and buy an album that I released for $10 is actually a huge deal.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, to have even a fraction of those folks, and again, for me, it's like 14 people, let's say, for a single album, but most of those folks spend more than my asking price, because Bandcamp allows you to, add an extra, tip for the artist you're buying for. Someone spent $50 on a remix album that I put out a few months ago, which is insane to me. Granted, there's a whole lot more involved with that campaign. Like, we were donating some of it to a good cause, and this person really wanted to help, and it was a collaborative album. But like, to build up that sense of community and these causes that we can sort of like rally around and come together as musicians, and then to have even just like a tiny fraction of that 2,100 follower audience then go financially support myself, my fellow artists, a cause we all care about, is like really powerful, even in those like little micro moments there.
Yeah. No, that is, I mean, it makes so much sense that folks are finding you in that space, and it just feels so much more meaningful than, I don't know, popping up in a random Spotify playlist and then never,
Mm-hmm.
the song disappears and you never hear from them again. Whereas now people know this is who Kid Lightbulbs is. He works at
Yes.
Buffer, he's a dad, like, this is why he makes music in this way, and he's collaborating with them. They're just so much more invested in you as a person. And I think, I don't know, that humanizing element is what's really cool about Threads for me.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, just to build, because you also brought up the fact that I am a musician who also works at Buffer. Like, it's been
Yeah.
really fun to occasionally, interact with fellow musicians, or, even music fans who are trying to like build their own following online. They ask questions about Buffer publicly to me on Threads, and I'll like invite them to,
Yeah.
email me, go to our like public feedback board to like suggest features. So being able to like tie those conversations in has been super fun, because it doesn't feel like work, because I'm talking to a lot of the same people I generally interact with. It gets Buffer out there. It allows me to, you know, express different, views and ideas that I have, that are not just, all music theory, all music business stuff all
Yeah.
the time. Which honestly I think starts to get stale with a lot of creators.
Employee advocacy at its finest, folks. Are you listening? This is this is how it happens. Okay, so something that you have already kind of touched on is being a product manager and a musician. There's a bit of a, I don't want to say tension, but there are very different roles there. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you think about showing these two parts of yourself online?
Yeah. It's really funny, because I think about this, and in some stints kind of struggle with it a little bit, but I feel like I've hit a stride, particularly on Threads. And just to compare, on LinkedIn, I've actually really struggled with this, just because I think of the nature
Mm,
of the circles and the audience that I have on LinkedIn as a product person, where, talking about the things that I am interested in music, like, don't really land there. They don't, have the same, engagement, what have you, that when I, post a take about product stuff, will have on LinkedIn. But on Threads, I've found ways to sort of like merge those ideas a little bit, in a couple different ways. One I just mentioned, where I can sort of also act as a steward advocate for Buffer and for users who might
mm,
benefit from Buffer, or, trying to use Buffer in their own social media journey. And it's become very seamless and fun for me to sort of like shift from talking about like something I'm trying out with my own music marketing to, you know, talking like mentioning that I'm like using Buffer to manage the social aspect of it, and then someone asks me a question about
Yeah.
Buffer, and then it turns into a conversation about Buffer, and that sort of natural segue comes up actually a fair amount, and that's been one way to sort of merge them. Another one that I've been doing quite a bit of, and for context here, like I've said is before, but to get into a little bit more of the weeds, like being an independent musician online in 2025 is really, really weird because there's so many more tools and platforms out there that can help you get your music out there and even like make the music. But a lot of those platforms are not really artist first. Case in point, Spotify, you know, all of the streaming as a business model is really not meant for it's really a consumer first medium and not really one where the artist, you know, is compensated, let's say, to the degree that they would for buying music directly. I said that
Yeah.
earlier with the Bandcamp example. So I've been, you know, really keen because I'm, you know, a very busy person. I don't have a lot of time to just go, you know, market myself incessantly or spend a lot of money on promotion and PR and stuff like that. So I've been trying to find ways to sort of like experiment with my online music presence, my music release strategy, things like that. And I've been using actually a lot of like product and growth experiment methodology to sort of drive some of that. You know, if I want to try releasing music one particular way, like kind of stage the songs of an album out over a period of time, you know, kind of loosely define some success metrics and like leading indicators that tell me that that's working, kind of reflect on how that went and, you know, adapt and tweak for the next release. And then talking about that publicly on my online and talking especially about like how I am defining success for these releases,
Mm.
has been one way that I've like found a lot of really just had a lot of fun. I don't know if it's valuable to other people, but I have a lot of fun talking about this stuff. And you know, I'll occasionally get folks responding to those posts about it that are like really kind of thankful for me, you know, sharing some of these ideas that like you don't always have to release music in the same way that, you know, the Spotify algorithm incentivizes you to do so, which is a very single centric way of doing things, meaning like
Yeah.
you usually only release one song at a time and it's not really friendly to like larger album releases. I like to make full albums worth of music, so I, you know, have been trying to experiment with different ways of making that work for me and sharing those ideas of what works and what hasn't worked, which works with other platforms, what even platforms to try, and using a little bit of product methodology and experiment and sort of scientific method with it, has really resonated with my audience to some degree. And that's like the other way that I try to sort of like bridge these different areas of expertise, I guess, that I have.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that you are applying stuff from your day job to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, all of the cool superhero stuff that you do by night. And then I'm sure that is incredibly valuable for folks who, I mean, without your background, even as a marketer, a lot of that stuff is quite difficult for me to follow. And, you know, I'm not like, I'm a content person, I'm not like an analytics person. So,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I think that is super, super valuable, especially if you are really, I am completely tarring people with probably an unfair brush right now. But if you're creatively minded like a musician, a lot of this stuff is, you know, probably doesn't come super naturally. So it makes sense that so many of, you know, so many folks who follow you find it valuable.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's like almost like uniquely challenging with music and independent musicians because of, you know,
Yeah.
music, the music industry has sort of like this really tricky history of, you know, exploitation of musicians and especially musicians that are not that are in like marginalized groups. So, you know, I can understand and empathize with large groups of smaller independent musicians who just like can't figure out a way to break through, and it feels very
Yes.
exploitative, it feels very, you know, defeating, very just like a constant massively uphill battle. So just to like have any idea out there that is not just like the thing that everyone tells you to do, I think is net good for the world, and I think my audience appreciates it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, talking about things that everyone tells you not to do. So, your approach to social, I love it because it feels so much more accessible to me. I mean, we talk a little bit about, when we give folks advice on setting up social, we're talking about setting your goals, building a strategy, choosing niches, all of these things that if you're a creator, just you're on social, not to be on social, you're on social to promote your album or find folks to subscribe to your newsletter or whatever the case is. All of that can feel quite intimidating and a lot of work. So I want to talk to you about your unstructured approach to social. What has worked for you, even if it is not a traditional social strategy?
Yeah. My strategy is to just quite simply not have a strategy. I
I
kind of
love
just
it.
like I started by, and this goes a little bit back to the imposter syndrome that I started this whole conversation with, that
Mm,
sort of like kept me from being on social, where I was for a long time very, worried about, not everything that I would post even like get noticed at all. It's very defeating to, post a bunch of stuff that, nobody engages with or nobody seems to care.
yeah.
But I don't know if it's because I'm now a father and I have very limited time to worry about this and I'm very passionate about the things that I do, but I kind of just like decided to stop overthinking it and give myself permission to just like post whatever whenever it comes to mind and not really worry about it too much. A lot of what I post, particularly on Threads, this isn't the case for every other social network because I don't think this lands the same way on every other social network. But for
Absolutely.
me, kind of treating Threads as just like an ether that I can just like shove any idea onto has actually been very liberating for me. And what has surprised me in terms of like what's worked is where it's very unpredictable for me in terms of like what actually resonates or like goes viral or gets like some amount of engagement that is like much more than I expected. I posted
Mm.
some like very silly, short, no thought hot take about the Charlie Brown Christmas soundtrack around Christmas time last year. And it's like one of the most like viral, like most engaged with posts I've ever posted on social media ever. And I think it was basically just like a silly hot take about how I think it's the only good like Christmas album or something. Um,
I need to
and
go
I
find that.
put no thought into it. I think I had the idea in my head and I posted it within 10 seconds. And just like the pleasant surprise about things like that because I just didn't overthink it was almost like step one for like my social media strategy, for lack of a better word. This idea that like you can kind of just give yourself permission to post whatever comes to mind when it makes sense and then start kind of optimizing from there. I now recognize if I'm like posting too frequently or it feels like I am, I start to like pull back and pre-schedule a couple of things on buffer, so I'm not just like posting 30 things in a day, and overwhelming the algorithm with a bunch of noise from me. So I start to like kind of refine or pull back a little bit if it feels like I'm, shouting too much. And then if I'm, feeling like I'm not shouting enough, the
Hmm.
next time I have like a random idea, I give myself permission to post it. And that's not always good. I'll post something and decide to delete it a few hours later if it feels wrong. But, it's really just about being there. And
Mm.
again, knowing that I have the community there and knowing that they kind of implicitly know and trust like what I'm about. Um, I think like it kind of made it feel okay to not be super structured. Um,
Yeah.
Second, because I sort of post about a bunch of different things and not just music or just this particular niche of music. I know we talk a lot. There's a lot of discourse around how like as a creator you need to really find and double down on a niche,
Mm.
and that feels like
Which can
increasingly the
work
case on. It can work. I think it's very
for
common on
for
LinkedIn.
specific people. Yeah.
Yes. And I think for me, exactly the opposite of that is what worked for me.
Mm.
And I think not only is it, I think, what helped me cultivate a following in this community, but it just like works better with how I think and the frankly
Mm.
lack of time that I have to plan for this stuff. And it gives me like more, groups of topics I can just post about whenever,
Yeah.
an idea comes to mind. Um, I think the last thing that really comes to mind for me is really just like having some loose degree of accountability. Some of that is
Yes.
built into the fact that like Threads for me is like a loose community. So if I have an audience that is interacting with me somewhat regularly, I have incentive to just be there posting something. And if it's not for me on my own, it's because, someone mentioned me on a post or someone asked me a question that they want my opinion on, which actually does
Yeah.
happen from time to time. And that's really nice. But the other way that it's really helped is actually like in the feature, the couple of features we just shipped at Buffer with streaks and goals, like just a very simple nudge inside the Buffer app that tells me, oh, like I did post once this week. That's better than nothing. And it's just like the little nudge to get me like thinking, oh, I just need to put something out there, and just anything is better than nothing. And
Mm-hmm.
that little nudge on itself was like such a big win for me. It may have also been like a slight influence for why we, got pushed that out at like very early in the year to try and like help people kind of
Yeah.
have that similar notion. But that in particular has been such a really useful nudge for me. And now that we have goals, which you can sort of set on a channel by channel level, I've started to, set little, very, conservative, simple goals for the other platforms that I'm not as like naturally tied to, like LinkedIn or TikTok. Like if I can just commit myself to posting anything at all to TikTok once a week, like that's good enough for me to feel like I'm
You're
doing
doing better than me.
something. I haven't been consistent about TikTok. I have been relatively consistent about LinkedIn though.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that's really what it is. It's like giving myself permission to be silly and not overthink things, because that is actually very natural to me as a person. And then like that little bit of accountability, it doesn't need to be super structured. Some of it is sort of built in depending on the type of audience you build. But like very, very minor sense of accountability also is like a huge help for me.
Oh my gosh, I have so many threads that I want to pull on right now. But the first of them is your approach to social actually reminds me a lot of, so when I had Jade Powell, who is brilliant on Buffer Chat, you should definitely go and listen to her if you're listening to this and this sounds like it might be your vibe. Her advice, her number one piece of advice was just post. Because
Mm-hmm.
so often we get in our own way, right? Even if we are the kind of people like Exhibit A who, we want a strategy and we want like a plan, like defined content pillars or a niche. And even when we have all that, we can spend so much time creating that, but we don't actually get to doing the work, right? And then something else that you reminded me of was I'm a huge fan of Ali Abdal because I love productivity content. He's a YouTuber,
Mm-hmm.
but he also talks a lot about being a YouTuber. He has like courses and everything. And one of his key pieces of advice is also just start getting the content out. Now, obviously, a YouTube video is a much higher lift than threads post, but I think the same rule applies. Like that's something that you just touched on now. It's like just start posting, start doing what feels natural and authentic to you, and from there
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of retroactively build a strategy because you get to know the platform, you get to know the audience, you get to kind of you find that music line again, you like find that rhythm, and you kind of
Mm-hmm.
you're learning to play that tune. And I love that approach. And I think, I don't know, this has made me really excited. I think it might be time to just take a step back and relook at my own social media strategy, because I think I am falling
Yeah.
into that trap of like, okay, where do I post this? How do I talk about that? Where maybe it is a case of just getting out of my own way and giving myself
Yeah.
permission, as you said.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that quite a bit, and I think that was like that and the unique fact that I started doing exactly what you just described with threads when it was new and greenfield and
Yeah,
not a lot of people
green
were on there,
space.
so we were all kind of feeling it out. So there was sort of this like flash in the pan moment that I was able to capitalize on in terms of like building a community, building an audience there, and like intentionally being and very consciously being very natural to me in terms of that. Whereas I feel like I actually like really struggle with that on LinkedIn right now. Like finding something that is natural to me, that is that feels like I'm not alone in trying to figure out what is natural to me, because there's so many
Yeah.
other people on LinkedIn who have like their very specific voice talking about very specific things. Um and I'm trying to work through that a bit myself there. Similarly with TikTok, which is just like a place that I feel like as a musician, everyone just sort of assumes you need to be there. Like
Mm,
most non, industry veteran people seem to blow up on TikTok, and that's where like that's how they get like well known. And TikTok has been like a really interesting sort of like reflection point for me, because I find myself wondering like, do I even need that to be successful, fulfilled, what have you, as a musician? I don't know if there's like an audience for the product stuff that I do. Maybe there is, but as a musician, it's sort of just like the place everyone tells you you need to be. And I'm like really wondering, is it even aligned with like what I want as far as success or
Yeah.
goals for myself as a musician? And I'm kind of like landing on the answer being maybe no. And maybe that's
Mm.
just like a network I don't need to be on because, my music is to spoiler my music is very much like concept albums. I'm not putting out like singles and short songs like Trendsetters, the song you mentioned. It's a 7.5 minute song. It's not something you
I
can like
have
really
listened to
cut
it
down.
end to end about 50 times. It's
That's
brilliant.
amazing. I'm very flattered. But it's not a song that I can really just like chop up for like a short form video on TikTok.
No, you wouldn't
Most of
do it
my music
justice. I know
can't
that.
really do that. It's not really like what I even want. Like it's not even how I want to portray my music. So is is there any value in the audience that I would build there given the format of TikTok and the kind of the norms of TikTok? Maybe not. And then if I think about the fact that many of the people on TikTok are probably also on all of these other platforms, Instagram,
Hmm.
Threads, Blue Sky, YouTube, wherever, like I still have an opportunity to still resonate and, capture new fans on those other places in formats and with, the particular lens that I want to give my music to. So maybe I just don't focus on TikTok so much, and that's also fine. I don't need to be everywhere
Exactly.
and thinking about a strategy for every single place.
Exactly. Also, because first point, you have tried it
Mm-hmm.
and you haven't kind of found like your groove there. Music pun again. Um,
Yeah.
and then secondly, Everything Everywhere All at Once is a great movie. Terrible approach to social media. A great movie and
Mm-hmm.
book. Sorry, people are gonna flame me for that. Um,
Yeah.
but it's not a good approach to social media. It is a fast track to burnout. So I love that you
Mm-hmm.
raised that. And maybe it is a case of just carving out your niche in one or two platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah, that feels a lot more attainable to me. Okay, so kind of tying into this, for creators who feel inconsistent or unsure if they even belong on social media, what would you tell them?
Um, that's a good question. Probably just to, reassure that there is probably a niche or a place for you depending on, what you care about, what you want to be online for. You don't have to be everywhere all at once. You don't need to, be on a platform you're diametrically opposed to for whatever reason.
Mm,
Um, but you also don't need to worry so much or you don't need to worry so much about comparing yourself to what everyone else is doing. There are like 8 billion people plus in the world. Most of those people are online. There will always be a niche that you can find and fill. So don't sweat it too much. You can be consistent. You don't need a strategy, at least to start. Um, you can also use tools to make it easier, and those tools can be software, like Buffer, or any other tools that are specifically tailored. But it also can be just like mental models and just um, like thinking through how you want to, you know, define success for yourself, in terms of like being online. Um, it also doesn't have to be tied to a particular side of your personality. It can be, personal. It could be work. It could be both. It could be any number of things. So you don't have to necessarily assume you have to treat yourself on a platform based on what like the majority of people you see are doing. You can contain multitudes if you want.
I love that. That's so good. I feel like that's definitely going to be an intro clip or something along those lines. Um, okay, that is amazing. So, before we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about some of the cool things that you mentioned because these are among my favorite features in Buffer, and I have found them so helpful in kind of keeping me on track. Like, for example, my 11-week streak in Buffer is orange right now. And so I know that in order to get rid of my 11-week streak, I need to go and schedule a post from my very full create space. Anyway,
Mhm.
I found them so motivating, and I wondered. So Brandon is, the driving force behind a lot of these projects. And while I have you, I think it would be great if you could just talk a little bit about those features and how they
Yeah.
could be helpful to a creator like you, or they are helpful to a creator like you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think for me personally, I need some degree of accountability to like keep myself on these platforms. I mentioned earlier I have like this sort of community that I've cultivated on Threads, and that sort of implicitly, creates a little bit of accountability. People are literally like mentioning me on Threads, asking for my take on something, and stuff like that is fine, but that doesn't necessarily get me sharing ideas. So the idea of the streak was meant to be so simply, did you just post anything at all? It doesn't even matter where or how much. Did you just post anything at all in the last week? We landed on a week because not everybody has something they want to share every day. In fact, like the usage data of our users pretty clearly indicates a trend where people seem to be posting and thinking about posting on a roughly weekly cadence, whether it's every weekday or Saturdays or Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. That cadence is actually like pretty strongly seen in existing buffer users. So we thought, if we can help more users just like feel like a little bit of a nudge, and a little bit of a help to just try and get something out there at all. Again, any platform, doesn't really matter which one you've connected to buffer. It feels like that could be a useful, help to, starting to form any sort of posting habit. It doesn't even need to be a high degree of consistency or with much strategy behind it, but just posting anything at all on a consistent weekly basis. And we have the data to even inform that does help a user build an audience slowly, potentially, but increasingly over time. It's literally what helped me build an audience on Threads. It's what, for a while, really helped me build an audience on LinkedIn when I was really focused on that. And there was not a whole lot of thought there. It was just consistent posting, not even as
Yeah.
frequently as I thought I needed to be doing. So that was sort of like the key sort of genesis of streaks and sort of the mechanic that we landed there. With goals, the idea is to go, the next step deeper. Once you start posting anywhere once a week, like that's great. Can you do it once, twice a week on one particular social channel? Like if you're really focused on Threads, can you really make sure you're posting once, twice, three times a week on Threads? And that, helps keep your streak going, but it allows you to be a little bit more strategic, a little bit more focused on one particular channel, and maybe being a little bit more ambitious than just the once a week thing. But
Yeah.
also it's totally optional. Like we're not really pushing for, every user to, just be spamming the networks constantly, or, to be aggressively pushing a habit that you might not be ready to form to a degree that, professional markers can do. So starting small and really allowing a user to simply and like conservatively start with a posting habit that they want to achieve, and then gradually growing it over time is the approach that we think is going to be really most helpful for most
Yeah.
creators, or maybe even aspiring kind of new to this creators who
Yes.
just want to be online but don't really know what is good, or what is enough. There's more that I think we can do and we're planning to do to really help with users who want to be doing that but also don't really know what to be posting, and that's something we're working on now. But I'm really excited about just getting these simple mechanics in front of more of aspiring creators who just like want to be there but like don't know what their benchmark should be. The benchmark doesn't need to be as ambitious as you think it needs to be, and it certainly
Yes.
hasn't been for me. And I'm able to build an audience with that.
Okay, so I know we've talked a lot about the nuance of how you built your audience in Threads, um,
Mm.
and the strategy that has kind of formed itself over time. But would it be fair to say that consistency has been the biggest driver in helping you grow a community on Threads?
Yes, and I think that it's interesting to like almost break down what consistency means. It doesn't necessarily need to mean, you're posting consistently at the same times every day. I know a lot of creators do that, but again, it could be as simple as just being there at all on a weekly basis, and maybe more frequently if you feel like you can do that. But, you know, I might be very inconsistent in the ideas that I share or the times at which I post, but being consistently on, you know, Threads and whatever other networks that I want to be on, again, on that sort of like weekly, roughly cadence has been probably the biggest thing for me. And then that kind of like explodes from there. You know, you're consistently there, you're making your presence known, you're starting to, you know, demonstrate the things you want to talk about, and that, you know, piques the interest of folks who might want to follow you. And even if they don't follow you, they'll interact with you a little bit, and that starts to, you know, build that community I talked about earlier. It gives you more ideas of other stuff you can post about later. You like engaging with the things that you are posting, again, even if it's not super frequently or super structured, you know, creates this really virtuous cycle where you have folks wanting to talk with you on the platform. You get ideas from engaging with those folks you're talking to, which then inspires new posts, which you could post on like a very structured cadence or not. It's kind of up to you. But as long as you're there on a consistent basis, like that to me has sort of become sort of like the rallying cry of, you know, how you can form and grow an audience online, really regardless of the platform you're talking about.
I love that. Thank you. Okay, I love that we talked
Cool.
about that. That's very cool. Amazing, amazing. Brandon, that is everything that I wanted to ask you. Thank you so much for making the time. We will, of course, be including all of your links, including to your Bandcamp where people can listen to your music. In the show notes, pop over there if you want to listen to it. I highly recommend Trendsetters. It's such a great
It's a
track
long
to,
one.
like,
It's a journey.
but you know what? It's so great to put on while you work because like it just like builds, and then you kind of get like you swept up in it, and then I don't know, it's a good focus song for me.
Thank you.
Okay, so you will be able to find Brandon on Threads, on LinkedIn, on Bandcamp. I just have one last question for you, Brandon. What song are we doing for karaoke at the Buffer Retreat?
Is it one of my songs, or
Well, it
are
can
we
be.
talking
I
about any
mean,
songs?
we can. Are you going to bring your piano?
I probably not. It's hard to fly with a piano.
Sure, sure. Okay, so
um,
what song are we going to do?
there are billions of songs to choose from. That's a very hard question that you decided to end
Okay.
with.
Okay, you know what? We're gonna follow up with this on Threads. Maybe if Brandon and I, because we said we were gonna do it, we were gonna karaoke on the last Buffer Retreat, and then we never did. So if it does happen, I will make sure someone documents it, films it, or takes a photo, and then we'll post about it on Threads if you care enough. You probably
Important
don't.
question. Important question though. Is it a duet? Because I don't know if the Buffer Chat audience knows this, but Kirsti is also a singer, and that feels like it should be public knowledge.
It is. It is. You know what? I'm grateful that I was a singer in many ways before the days of YouTube, because there are some very embarrassing videos of me that exist in the universe. Thankfully, they don't exist on YouTube. Wow. Okay. This has taken a detour. Brandon, thank you so much for your time. If you found this episode helpful, and even our chat about karaoke, I have some equally amazing guests lined up in the coming weeks, so definitely keep an eye on Buffer's social channels for that. Yeah, it's been amazing. See you next time.
Thank you. This is a lot of fun.